This week's Annapolis conference brought high hopes that if enough Middle East leaders get together, they can solve the intractable problems between Israelis and Palestinian Arabs. But a big part of this fight goes back more than half a century. November 29, 1947. The United Nations votes to divide the region known as Palestine into two distinct nations. The decision did not come easily. The world was still dealing with the horror of the Holocaust, and a high number of Jewish survivors had nowhere to go. They longed to move to their ancient homeland, but clashes there between Jews and Muslims had grown worse. Britain controlled the region and feared a worldwide Muslim uprising if they allowed more Jews in. A striking symbol came in 1947 when 5 British destroyers blocked the Exodus, a ship filled with 4,500 Jewish refugees. It was against this backdrop that the United Nations prepared to vote whether to give the Jewish refugees a place they could finally call home. One look at the 1947 UN plan indicates why this is still a problem today. It strangely divided the territory for Jews in the north and south, for Arabs in Gaza, Judea and Samaria, and an international zone around Jerusalem.
And it was by no means a sure thing that partition was going to pass.
Novelist Brock and Bodie Taney have thoroughly researched that time.
The United Nations at that time was 56, 57 members. You had to get a 2/3 majority vote of those voting to pass a question. What they had to overcome in the UN was this block of Arab votes that very clearly were all going to vote no to partition.
Also stacking the odds against the Jewish homeland, President Truman's own State Department urged him not to support partition. But historian Michael Oren says a surprising twist in the drama of the Cold War led Truman to get on board.
And it wasn't until October when Truman awoke one morning to be told by his aides that the Soviet Union had supported partition, that Truman realized that the United States had not only to support partition, but the United States had to come out and be the front runner.
That decision put the lobbying for yes votes into high gear.
America even went to France and said, listen, we have been rebuilding your country post-World War II. If you want the aid to continue, you are going to vote in favor of partition.
And they are all gathered together and they're deciding whether or not there will be an independent state of Israel. And America has just lobbied to the max.
For the Jews of Palestine and their leaders, the coming vote on potential statehood became both a dizzying dream and a nightmare in waiting.
So nobody thought about a state, really a state, because we knew a state means war. And nobody wanted a war.
Afghanistan? No.
On November 29th, millions of Zionist Jews and Christians gathered near their radios, listening for what many saw as the fulfillment of biblical prophecies.
The resolution of the DUC Committee for Palestine was adopted by 33 votes, 13 against, 10 abstentions.
After the vote, 2,000 years of pent-up celebrations for the Jews of Palestine. Bodie Taney notes that the very day the UN voted to allow a Jewish state, translation began on the newly discovered Dead Sea Scrolls, scrolls that included Isaiah's foretelling the rebirth of the nation of Israel.
It's no coincidence that the Lord sends someone bearing all of the prophecies that have to do with the return of Israel as a nation. November 29th, 1947. That happened.
But for the Arabs and Muslim nations, the vote was a call to war. The violence between Arabs and Jews would intensify and then erupt into full-blown conflict when Israel declared itself a state in May 1948. The Arabs' rejection of the 1947 vote continues even to this week's conference in Annapolis.
The Arab states have never accepted the partition resolution and the legitimacy of the State of Israel. And I think that the fact that the Palestinian delegation has come out flat and said that they will never recognize Israel as a Jewish state indicates their continued refusal to accept the partition resolution, because the resolution calls for specifically the creation of a Jewish state in Palestine.
Oren believes that because of the growth of the Arab-Muslim bloc, today's UN would never approve of a Jewish state, But 60 years later, Israelis continue to build on the vote that helped them become a nation. Chris Mitchell, CBN News.
When you look at Israel today, you see a country the size of New Jersey and home to just 7 million people. But look closer and you find a thriving democracy, a renowned military force, and a world leader in technology and agriculture. It has given the world the cell phone, computer processors, and voicemail. Israelis have also made the barren desert bloom again, planting forests and exporting fruits, vegetables, and flowers. Israel's modern story officially began on May 14, 1948, when Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion declared the country's independence in a small Tel Aviv building. Just a few hours later, the United States under President Harry Truman became the first country to recognize Israel.
The United States recognizes the provisional government as the de facto authority of the new state of Israel.
Historian Michael Oren says Truman's faith helped him defy his advisors' strong objections and support Israel's statehood.
He could recite large passages from the Bible. He knew the map of Palestine better than he knew the map of his neighboring county in Missouri. And he had been a member of a evangelical committee when he was a senator called the American Christian Committee for Palestine, which was pro-Zionist.
Immediately, doors opened to thousands of Holocaust survivors who had lost everything. A nation miraculously born in a day now would give them a homeland.
In the whole history of the world, no people, no country has ever gone out of existence for anything like 2,000 years and then been reborn. So it is correct to say that it's a miracle, but that is the dramatic understatement. Because the rebirth of Israel is a whole series of miracles.
Israel would need many miracles just to survive the day after statehood. Arab armies attacked from all sides. Trained by the British and much better armed, they vowed to push the Jews into the sea. That caused many of the new Jewish refugees to become instant soldiers.
Many of them got off in the docks and they had weapons thrust into their hands and were told, "Welcome to Israel, you are now fighting for her survival, and by the way, yours is kind of on the line too."
These tanks and trucks, decorated with wreaths, are the actual vehicles from the 1948 Battle of Latrun, a key battle to break the siege of Jerusalem and help Israel survive its first war as a modern nation. Fight for Jerusalem was intense, and although the Jewish residents of the old city would be forced to lose their homes, they helped Israel survive the early days of the war. In its 60 years, Israel has fought 3 more wars on its own soil and 2 more in Lebanon. And today's radical Islamists share the same goal as Israel's Arab foes in 1948, to put an end to its existence. Historian Paul Johnson believes supernatural timing is part of Israel's creation, which is marked by many Arabs and Muslims as a catastrophe, and by Israel's supporters as a source of celebration.
The truth is, in asking for their independence and for a national home, the Jews were about 10 to 15 years ahead of the Arabs. If they'd been running neck and neck, they'd have never have got it, in my opinion. So they stepped through a window of history which suddenly opened briefly into nationhood, and it is one of the miracles of history that this happened.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.